Hi everyone, welcome to our session. This is graphical reporting in Totara Learn, and in this particular webinar, we're going to be looking at Totara Learn version 11. I'm Wesley Holden. I'm the community manager here at Totara Learning, and happy to walk you through the tools today and answer any questions you may have. Please feel free to type your questions into the chat or Q&A area. After our session, we'll be posting the recording up publicly, like on YouTube, so you'll be able to go back and rewatch or send it off to colleagues if you need to. The discussion Q&A will continue on the Totara.community site. If you don't already have an account there, please go ahead and set one up. Totara.community is where we have discussions about the product, about both Totara Learn and Totara Social, talk about best practices and integrations and new release features and things like that. So please feel free to join us if you haven't already. So today we're going to be taking a look at graphical reporting in Totara Learn. So I think about a month ago, we talked about reporting in general and what that looks like, about being able to build your own reports, choose the columns of data you want to see, choose the filters, what sort of content controls you want to have in terms of like who sees what data in a report and who can access what reports. So today we're going to look specifically at aggregation and grouping. So going through and being able to not just say, give me a list of the 50 users who have done something, but being able to actually group them automatically and do some aggregation, counts, sums, things like that with your data. We're going to look at building graphs. So that's really the biggest goal for the session today, is how to actually go, and we'll create a couple of graphs just so you can get an idea of how to do that. And then we'll talk about using the report graphs block, which is a way to take the data that you're creating, these graphs that you're creating, and making them available to your users without them just having to go and actually run the report, but actually using it to add to your dashboards and things like that in the system. So I'm going to jump out of PowerPoint and go ahead and jump straight into a live system. We're using the demo.totaralearning.com site, which you're always welcome to go to as well. It's a public demo site. It has a lot of data, and so you're able to go in and run reports and get an idea of what things are going to look like. And it automatically resets every 24 hours, so you can kind of go and play around and know that the site's going to be, back to original before too long. So what we're going to do is we're going to just walk through building a report very quickly, and then we're going to walk through adding the graphs to it, and then making a dashboard block out of it. But I have a question for you before we jump too far in. If you could do me a favor and just give me a quick hand raise, you should see the hand raise option down at the bottom of the screen. Raise your hand if you have tried to use graphical reports at this point. So even if it's just been you've gone in and created one report and decided you didn't know what you're doing, or maybe you have some that you're already using and distributing to your team. So just let me know. We'll just leave it open for a minute to see how many folks have actually kind of gone in and played around with it at this point. It looks like a fair group. It's a little bit more than half. That's excellent. Okay, cool. Thank you for that. So I'm going to go ahead and lower the hands now. Thank you all for responding. And so here's my next question. If you started to use it but you didn't get very far, what was the thing that blocked you? Go ahead and type into the chat for me. Could you not find a tool? Did it not do what you needed? I know earlier people talked about the user interface and how the report colors and things like that didn't really look that great. So do me a favor and go ahead and put into the chat what it was that, if you ran into issues, what blocked you, or what you were looking for that you couldn't quite find. The goal of collecting that sort of information is because in a couple of weeks, we're going to be running a Q&A session where we talk through specifically the issues you've had or blockers or things like that. And that way we know if something needs to be a feature request, if something maybe if you just needed a help to figure out how to do that thing. And so that'll help drive our next session, which is basically open office hours, but it gives me some areas to discuss that people are running into. Yeah, so I'm seeing some really common stuff. There's too much data to make the graph useful. That is a really common one for people starting out with it. Some people were just playing to see if they could do with future reports. That's great. And if you have other things, please feel free to pop them into the chat as well, just to let us know sort of what you were looking for that maybe you didn't find or you needed help with. So what I've done so far is I have this demo site that has a ton of data in the back end. And what I've done is just created some existing report graphs. So for example, we have course progress by user. So this graph is showing for the people who report to me, which is Jill and William, the number of courses that they have essentially been signed up for and their progress in them. So we can see the number that they've completed. Jill's completed 5, William's completed 7, how many they have in progress, and the number they haven't started yet. So if we just sort of hover, you can see the little tooltip that pops up there that gives me that specific number. So all of these pieces are configurable. The numbers that you see down the side, some things are a little less useful than others. Like it's automatically saying numbers like 4.2 and 5.6, which doesn't really help us when we're asking for the number of courses somebody has completed. So there are ways that we can take the data that the graphical reports gives us and we can modify it and make it more useful. So I'll show you how to do that. So with all of the graphs, you are going to need to pull some data that's already out there. So I'm going to just click on the report link there to get into the report itself. So here's the data we're pulling. The user's name, the number of courses completed, number in progress, number not yet started. But notice that not all that data necessarily has to show up in the graph. In this case, it is. Because one of the things that, the very first thing I did, honestly, when I got graphical reports is I'm like, great, graphical reports, I've wanted this forever. And I went in and I took one of my reports that was already fairly complex that had like user's name, program, name, courses within the program, the organization they were in, the position they held, like the completion statuses for all these things. And so I had this very complex report, and then I tried to just throw a graph on it. And what I ran into is just that, there was just too much data to even pull something useful out of that report. So then it's okay, I need to back off on this and start really simple. And so starting very simply, it was okay, well, what do I actually care about? I care about the program, because in this case, it was a program completion report. I care about the program name, the status, and the organization the person was in. Those were actually the only 3 pieces of data that I really cared about. Everything else was a nice to have, but not really necessary for that particular version of the report. So here's what I did. I'm going to walk through it with you. We go to site administration and we build a report just like we normally would. So we go and grab our reports, we go report builder. I'm going to create a new report. We're going to choose a source. So the sources are the same for graphical reports as well as the table-based data. So pick which one suits your needs. And let me just go down. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure that we're recording. So we go, in this case, we're going to go with program completion because it's going to give me all of the data that I care about. So we'll call this program completion graphical. I'm only putting the word graphical in there just so I can easily find it because this demo site does have a lot of reports on it. So I'm going to just view this report and show you what we get out of the box. And there's a fair amount of information there, the person's name, their program, their status, and due dates. So the first thing you need to do is clear out the data that you don't actually need for this particular graphical report. So we'll go edit and dump some columns. So I'm going to keep the user's name, though when I actually want to see the data, I don't actually want to see the individual user. I want to see their organization. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of due date because I definitely don't need that. Status is nice. I'm going to keep that. User's name I'm going to keep, and then I'm going to go with organization. Get their organization name. So that simplifies things a bit. So the next thing I need to do if I want to build a graph is I need to have a count of something. Like you need some numbers to be able to graph it. In my case, what I want to know is the number of users who meet the criteria, who have been in a program and completed it, or whatever their status is. So what I want to do is count them. I need to count those users. And the way I'm going to do that is actually by applying aggregation or grouping onto a column. So in my case, for my demo site, I'm going to apply it to the user's login. So let me scroll down. Because what I need is some unique identifier for each individual user in this case. So I'm going to go ahead and use that, and I'm going to count them. So if you go into aggregation column, there's lots of different ways to aggregate the data or group it, depending on the type of column you have. So we'll go with count. I don't care about sorting and default columns and things like that for this. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit save. And actually, let me check. Actually, there is one more thing I want to do, but I'll show it to you. I'll make the mistake, and then I'll come back and show you how we fix it. So I'm going to save it. And then we're going to go and look at our columns of data first. So we want to make sure that the numbers are what we expect. So now we've got 2 users in the support services training at the not complete status who are in the internal help desk. So our filtering is working really well now. We've got the right number of users in those places. So my next piece then is actually getting the graph itself running. With the graph, there are multiple types that you can use: columns, pie graphs, lines, horizontal bars, etc. Choose whichever one makes the most sense for this particular data. Honestly, my 2 go-tos are the column or the pie chart, but there may be uses for the others as well, depending on what your data needs to look like. So in my case, let's go with the columns. And you can always come back and change it later, like you're never stuck with what you chose out of the box if you decide that, like, oh, that actually doesn't make sense for this data, or oh, this isn't looking the way I want it to. So we choose our type, we choose our orientation of data. So how is your data laid out? Like 90% of the time, it's going to be in columns. Sometimes it's in rows, but typically the orientation of your data is going to be in columns. Think about Microsoft Excel, because oftentimes, like what we do is we've been manipulating our data like in Excel or something like that and building graphs there. A lot of these rules are fairly similar to the way things happen in Excel. Next, we need to categorize. What do we actually want to group by? Do I want to group by the organization? Do I want to group by the program? Honestly, it doesn't, it depends on what you're looking for. In my case, I'm actually going to group up by the program, just because I think that'll be interesting. And then we need to choose a data source. So where are our numbers coming from? Sometimes if you have multiple columns that you have decided to have aggregation and grouping on, you'll have multiple items here. And so you have to choose the ones that make sense for your reports. In my case, I just have the one. Oh, and actually it looks like let me bounce back to my columns for a second, because I just realized I think I grabbed the wrong field. Yeah, I sure did. I don't want last login. I want the user's login. I could also, so on a typical site, I would use like user ID or something like that. Because this is my demo site, I don't necessarily have IDs in for everybody. So, and actually in my case, I can do their email address, because I know those are unique for this particular site. Okay. So now let's go and apply that graph. Oh, so there's a question on the columns. Just because on my particular demo site, I haven't gone in and assigned everybody an ID number. So if I were to run this against that, what I would come up with is a bunch of essentially blank ID numbers that would then be considered like one individual. So I want to make sure that I'm using a column that actually is something unique for each user. Then I'll go to my graph type. Again, we'll go back and get my columns in. And something to note is that when you're building out your graphs, if you build them out and then you go and change things, like if you get rid of columns of data or anything like that, you'll always need to come back and double check your graph to make sure that you didn't delete the data source, for example, because it will require you to come back in and reset it. So we've got that. We'll stack our columns, and then I'm going to save. And then we'll just run our report and see how we did. It looks like for some reason that didn't save. Sorry about that. The stack. Save changes. There we go. what happened was I was actually trying to use the same categorization as my data source, and it did not like that. So there we go. Now that's happy. Okay, so let's view that. And we have our two records, basically. So one for each program with its status, because what it's looking for is unique rows of data to group up by. So we have our program, and the reason why it's showing up separately like this is because I'm grouping up by organization. If I didn't care about organization, if I just wanted to see for the overall program what the count was, if I get rid of that one column, it's going to impact the way my data turns out in the graph. So that's something to keep in mind, is that you can have extra stuff showing up in your table, but it will potentially impact the graph. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and save again, double check my graph settings, make sure it all looks the way I expect it to, and just run that up again. Okay, so now I have one record, which is everybody in that program, not broken up by organization. So keep in mind that the table data you have is going to impact the way that your graph looks. That you can potentially have stuff in your table if you want it to. So now I've got 5 users in that program. They all happen to have that same status. So the next piece that people often run into trouble with is what the graph actually looks like coming out. So really interesting things happen, like we have like all of these decimal places that aren't particularly helpful for what we're looking for here. We also have colors that we don't really get to choose. They are automatically chosen by the system for you. And then, sometimes things happen like the legend pops up and covers up part of my data. And that actually has happened to me before with the report graph block, which we'll talk about in a little bit too. So what you can do is you can go in and customize those pieces. So I'm going to edit this report again. And what I'm going to say is that the ability to customize this is a little bit more complex than some people will want to manage in their system out of the box. So what I'm going to do is go back to graph. And at the very bottom, I'd skipped over before, there's this custom settings area. So if you click on the information icon, there's a link. And what this is we have used a tool called Advanced SVG Graph to do the graphing. Okay, so that's something that basically a library that already existed that we added to the software, another open source tool. And what we do, if we go in here, is we can see all of the PHP options that are available to decide how that's going to look. So we're going in and literally being able to say, here is what the background color is set to by default. Here's what I want it to be set to. So you can go through and change the look and feel of your graphs. So things like colors, fonts, alignment of text, etc. Also, there are the tooltips that pop up. So if you hover over parts of your graph, the tooltip is sometimes giving you numbers or pieces of information, like additional information about your graph. So you can come through and modify what that looks like. You can also manage like the units. So rather than, or the number of decimal places. So in my case, like I would set decimal places to 0 for this particular graph, because I don't necessarily need to see like, that it's 3.4 of a course. So you can come through and basically what you do is just, this is what your variable is going to be. So what the value that needs to be set, these are the options for those values. So, if the legend is empty, do we want to show it? No. We can go through and set it to true if we want to. Up above, you'll see, like, especially with colors, where you'll need to go in and put in the RGB value as part of it. So that's something worth playing around with. You can't really break anything with it. All you can do is, if it doesn't turn out the way you expect it to, you can go and just change it and fix it. So you can use that to modify the way your graph looks if you need to. And it gives you a lot more control over it. So another thing someone said is they're having trouble getting filters to work properly. So filters will behave similarly to the way they behave with tables, but they will also impact your graphs. So something to remember is that we can actually filter even if we don't include the column we're filtering with in our graph or in the table down below. So if I wanted to, and this is going to like basically blow up my report, but it's going to let me show you the example. If I go and view this report, and I search for a particular user's name, I think I've got an Amy, so we'll look for Amy. We can still search and get information out for that individual. It's not really very well reflected. Like I can't actually see Amy's name in a list or anything like that, which normally I would want to see so that I could sort of confirm that I was getting the right Amy. But if you do run filters, you are able to filter, and the data in the graph and the table will both be affected by those filters. Another thing you can do is, for example, like if I only want to see people who have completed the program, or I want to see the number of people who have completed it, and I search. In this case, the graph isn't going to show up because there's no data to show, because nobody has completed this. So rather than showing the graph with a 0, it just doesn't show it at all because there's 0 records to create data to create the graph from. So keep in mind that the data in your table is going to really impact the data in the graph. So I'm just going to go back and edit this again, just because I want to talk a little bit more about like content controls. Remember, content controls are the way that we say who gets to see what data in a report. It's going to work just the same way with graphical reports that it does with standard reports. If I have a graph and I've said, show you records based on the user and only show me my direct reports, then you're only going to see your direct reports in that graph. If you are filtering by things like position or organization, that's still going to apply through the content controls. I want to go back out now, and I actually want to build another report for you just to walk through another one so you can see that process, because we want to take a look at what it looks like to use dates in this sort of report. So again, I'm going to go and let's look at competency status. We'll create the report. So the columns I have are things like the name, the competency, the organization. So in this case, what I care about is I want to see the number of people who have completed a competency. So what I can do again is I can come in and say, okay, well, let's count these people. But maybe the thing that's interesting to me is when they became competent in it. So what I can do, I'm just going to dump some of these columns that I don't care about again. Remember, I can still add them back as filters if I want to. And so last modified is going to be the last time somebody touched this, essentially, for this user. But what I care about is more like when their proficiency was achieved. So we'll take that. And let's say that I want to see, sort of like what time of year people tend to become proficient in something. So what I can do is use the aggregation for date. I could go with year. I could go year, month, day even. So, the bigger my window of time is, the more people I'm going to be able to collect in it, essentially. So in my case, actually, let's go with quarter. So we'll say, I want to know what quarter of the year people typically complete their competencies in. So we'll get that. And I think I want to count too. Let's go ahead and count the folks that are in here. Along with counting, we can also do things like comma separated values. Actually, let's do that just so you can see what that looks like. So we'll go ahead and save changes. So what this report should show us then is the user or a list of users' names, the competency, and when they've achieved proficiency in it. So let's go ahead and view this report and see what we've got. So here we've got Jill and Amy, the competency name, and it should have a date in here, but my guess is they have not achieved proficiency in it, so we don't have any values. We've got a few values here. So here we go. Here's William and Bridget. With their management competency, they both achieved it in February of 2018. And if I want to, I might come in and search for a particular proficiency, or I might decide to only see, people that have been marked competent. So let's say we only want to see people who have been marked competent in something. So we can see those there. I'm guessing the blank space is maybe because sometimes when we've automatically populated data, not everything gets populated quite properly. So I think it's just a demo site thing. So my next step then is, well, what do I want to do with that? Well, let's throw a graph on it. So my graph type in this case, let's use pie chart. Again, we need to categorize. So what do we want to go based on? In my case, I want to go based on time of year. And then, I need to go and actually go back and add numbers. So right now, there's no column suitable for construction of a graph because I don't have any aggregated numbers for it to use. So let's go back. And instead of having a list of names, we'll go with a count. Then we'll save. Back to our graph. Do my pie chart. Categorize, get my data source, and save changes. Okay, so there's my pie chart. So now, we can see that pretty much all of these things have been completed for the same time of year. And if I wanted to make my data a little bit more interesting, what I could do is actually get rid of the competency name, because then I'd be able to see just overall competencies and when they've been completed. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm just going to dump a column from my table. And so you get to decide like how granular your data is going to be, what filters you want to apply, what content controls need to be applied, etc. So really look at your data and decide what makes the most sense. So in this case, we can see we've got a bunch of folks that have proficiency, but we don't know when. And then we've got a few folks that are proficient in that particular time period. So that can help me decide when to schedule training for, when I need to have my appraisal stages, or if I've started appraisals and have a stage where I'm asking people actively to go mark their competencies, I can see if that's been effective. So the final piece for today in our last couple of minutes is just to show you what you can then do with those graphical reports. You can obviously come in, run them. You can export them as well. And when you export, it'll export the image and the table, but only if you export as PDF. If you export as like an Excel or a CSV file, you'll just get the table data, but not actually get the image. So if you want the image, make sure you do a PDF export. The other thing you can do is you can add it to your dashboards. So we can come in and go to a dashboard. This is a dashboard for administrators or maybe for team managers. And we can add a block. And the block we care about is report graph. And then what we do is we go in and configure it. So we say, if we want to give it a title, we can. We choose the report that we want to use. If you have saved a search for your report, like if I had saved a search that said, just show me the people who had completed their competencies, then you could limit your report to show just that. But in my case, we'll go ahead and grab our competency status graph. You're going to decide how the content is going to be filtered. So is it going to show it for me? Is it going to show it based on the person viewing the block? So if I say me, I'm an administrator, and if somebody else goes to view that block, they're going to see it from my perspective. If I do current user viewing block, then the system will automatically apply the filter, the content control to say only show them the stuff they're supposed to see. And then there's the cache lifetime. So when you access your dashboard, do you expect people to keep coming back to it like every few minutes, or is it okay if the data just refreshes like every 30 minutes or something like that? So you get to decide that. You decide how big the graph is going to appear, if you wanted to have the block to have a border and a few other pieces like that. I'm going to go ahead and just save changes at the bottom. There we go. So we can see our couple of pieces of data there. And then there will always be a report link in the lower left-hand corner that people can go to see sort of the bigger report, including the table, and have filters that they can run. So I'm going to switch back over to my PowerPoint for just another minute or two, because we are just about at the end of our time. And I want to say thank you all for attending. I'm going to be using the questions and comments that you made to put in suggest features notes for the development team, suggest documentation, areas if there's things that were confusing. And also for the next session, we're going to be doing a QA session, which is basically open office hours. So you can come for a half hour, ask any questions you have about reports you're specifically trying to build, or give feedback, and I can take that back to the team. Useful resources for you walking out the door right now. Go to Totara.help for the documentation, Totara.community to come and talk to the community and ask for help or ask questions. Our next session before those Q&As is going to be Design for Habit. So Ran, who is our UX senior designer, is going to be running a session basically talking about software design and how to design for habit, how to apply new ideas from like neurology and stuff like that or from neuroscience, I should say, to the design that you're doing and helping people to, learn better and use the presentation to really benefit themselves when it comes to designing software. So if you go to the Totara.community site, go to upcoming webinars, you can sign up for that. You can also sign up for the Q&A sessions for this session. Thank you all for your time and attendance. Have a great rest of your day, and please feel free to reach out to me. It's usually best to reach out to me through the community site because that way you've got other support folks who are also able to answer questions. But you're also welcome to email me, wesley.holden@totaralearning.com. Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you soon.